Let's talk about neurodivergence and sex. As someone that likes to spend my time thinking about the intersections of all of these specific experiences and how it interplays with being neurodivergent, sex is one of those topics that I feel like is just simply not explored enough. I think a big part of it is just because research is very much so lacking, but also researchers probably don't really like to delve into sex. Sex is oftentimes seen as something taboo rather than scientific. And I mean, it kind of makes sense. Sex is very spiritual, as you guys will start to see in today's video. It is a lot about energies and feeling. It's about expression. It's about connection. It's about using your body to experience pleasure or to give pleasure. I think a big part of why sex isn't necessarily explored in the context of neurodivergence is because oftentimes neurodivergent folks are either demonized or infantilized. And I think the infantilizing part is the part where people start to feel uncomfortable when thinking about autistic folks. We see this topic even come up with, I think her name is Danny on Love on the Spectrum, where she talks about how sex and physical intimacy is an important part of her relationships. And I feel like people were very off-put by that. And I'm not sure if it's because she's autistic. All this to say, I think that's why I feel very drawn to talking about this topic and exploring it with someone who is very sex positive and is very well versed in any information having to do with sexuality, as well talking about the darker aspects of sex. So what does it look like to do sexual shadow work? What does it look like to reclaim your sexual sovereignty? What does it look like to reconnect yourself back into your body after a lifetime of disconnection? What does it look like to explore your sexuality with joy and pleasure and lightheartedness rather than seeing it as another way to put on a performance for someone? What is sexual masking? You know, all of these sorts of really important, juicy themes. You guys are lucky because Jaclyn and I are going to get into all these topics today. But with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic over to Jaclyn and have her introduce herself, talk about her background and what led her to do this work.
Yeah, Irene, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. I have a lot of lore, but I am currently a Jungian depth coach. I'm focused on sexual shadow work, and this was born out of some past experiences. I was also a professional dominatrix for a couple of years. So I got to interact with a lot of people. And when you're doing pro domination through the internet, it's a lot of psychodrama. It's very psychological, right? You're doing lots of role play, you're doing lots of fantasy. So I learned a lot about sexual shadow and sexuality, but also I was a kinky person. I was also trying to fit in like my own sexual expression. I am also a survivor of early life sexual abuse. So I always had these questions around my sexuality, like, is this something that is just who I am? Is this something that was born out of trauma? You know, what's going on here? Then after a couple of years of doing that, I went back into tech for a little while, which was just like a test from the universe and a huge mistake because I burnt out again, but in like a spectacular fashion, right? And that was also the year that I got diagnosed with ADHD. Because I had a lot of misdiagnoses. When I was younger, they were like, you're bipolar. And then I got older and they were like, no, you have CPTSD. And then I got older and they were like, this is ADHD. I went through that journey. So a lot happened in like 2021. I got the diagnosis. I was burning out. I had a spiritual awakening, what they would call like a sporadic Kundalini awakening or shamanic awakening. It was pretty intense. And I was really trying to make sense out of that experience. And also I had been in these back-to-back dark nights of the soul and burnout and all this stuff. And I was kind of like, what's going on here? You know, like I felt like my soul was kind of like hanging on by a thread. So when I found Jungian psychology and I started reading Carl Jung's work, it spoke to my soul in a way that just made sense. It just made sense to me at a deep soul level. So then I kind of went into hyper focus mode and really dug in and learned as much as I could about Jungian psychology, the connection to mysticism, all of that. But there was still the question of like, well, what about that kinky sex I like, right? Like, how does this interact? And I took my background that I had a lot of data from my dominatrix gig. So bridging these two things came natural. I was like, I see an intersection here.
How does sex tie into all this? So I think a really great way to kind of like open up this really layered conversation is for you to kind of explain to us what the purpose of sex is. Because I'm sure the purpose of sex isn't just to get an orgasm, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, this is a great question because this is part of the work that I do. It's like people always think like, oh, sex. And if you think of the chakra system, everybody thinks it's like, oh, the sacral chakra. And it's like, no, it really connects to every energy center, right? So even if you look at like the root, okay, that's primal, that's for survival, right? Like we're animals. There's like the first reason, right, why we have sex is to procreate, to survive, right? That's like the most primitive reason. And when you do talk about like moving up the sacral, that's pleasure, for joy, it's for us, for our creativity. And then moving up the solar plexus, power, right? Some people would just say sex is about power. It's about playing with power dynamics because, in a situation where there's two or more people, maybe there is both kind of a dominant and submissive energy and kind of this yin and yang energy that's playing out. People have sex for connection to themselves, right? If you're doing self-pleasure, connection to another person. Sex can also be a form of expression, a way of communicating with our bodies, with another person, or with ourselves. And then, the third eye aspect of sexuality, which I love the most, which I think is the most cool, which I work with a lot in sexual shadow work, is being able to be in touch with archetypal energy, even like mediumship, being able to use our sexual imagination. That's something that I think more people could have fun with. We kind of think, okay, if I'm gonna, go have an orgasm, like there's like this thing that I'm gonna go do. And I think a lot of people will use sex in that way, even for stress relief, right? If you want to even think about just to like the body, there's also, you get dopamine from it, makes us feel good. But if you really just kind of say, hey, I'm gonna like pleasure myself, and I'm also just gonna like open up my mind and visualize. I've gotten visions of like my future self during self-pleasure sessions, and I've seen different versions of myself. So I always say you can also use it as like a form of divination if you really want to tap into it that way. But really, it is our connection. If we want to talk about from the crown, it is like our connection to the divine, our connection to being a creator. So yeah, there's like a lot of different aspects of sexuality. And this is where you kind of get into people that are asexual, right? They might be sexual in the way that's only in their upper chakras, especially in the neurodivergent community. You'll meet people that are asexual and kinky. They will identify that way. So there's a couple different things here. One, there's the imaginatory aspects that are pleasurable, but also it's a somatic thing too. Because a lot of neurodivergent people have difficulties being in the body. So doing something like bondage, where there's no sex happening, no, sexual penetration or anything like that, asexual people can find a lot of pleasure in kink that doesn't necessarily need to be sexual.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Talking about all the purposes of sex, right? How does trauma play into severing you off from utilizing sex to fully connect and empower yourself?
Ooh, that's a big question because it really depends on the person and it really depends on the trauma. I mean, because there's different layers to this, because if someone's experienced just general childhood trauma, they were neglected emotionally, or maybe there was some physical abuse, it really wounds your sense of self. It creates this feeling of not being worthy. It creates a feeling of I'm unlovable at a very deep, deep level. It creates a lot of shame. That's really what it comes down to. A lot of trauma creates shame. Shame is the antithesis of pleasure. Shame destroys pleasure. And that doesn't mean that you can't have an orgasm, right? there's like two different kinds of orgasms you can have. One that's kind of purely physical and it's like really based on like just dopamine. And then the one that's more connected to like your heart and oxytocin and like connection, right? So if you have trauma, you can still have orgasms from that physical dopamine level, but it'll be harder to have those connected sexual experiences. And this is where relationships and sexuality tend to be the most difficult for people that have had any developmental trauma, because also it's where we're the most seen, right? It's when we're the most vulnerable. And from just like a biological level, sex is like a hyper present moment. If you're truly connected and tapped in, so that can be scary for people, even if you don't have trauma. So I think that trauma just adds an extra layer of difficulty and perhaps another layer of shame. And then sexual trauma, I feel like that is a whole other conversation. As someone that has experienced sexual trauma as a young person and in my adult life, and I've had to heal from that, unwind from that, decondition from that. It's really such a violation of the spirit. It's such a violation of the soul. So for anyone out there that has experienced sexual trauma or abuse, I feel you. I've been there. It's one of the most difficult things to overcome. It takes time usually, and it takes a lot of reconnecting with the body is so important. Our relationship with our body is, I would say, one of the most important things when it comes down to our sexual sovereignty is having that deep relationship and that deep love for our body.
So what you're saying is your sexual energy, in a sense, is almost like life force energy. It's almost like your own unique nectar that is your energy signature. It's not just important to figure out who you are, but it's also equally as important to figure out what you want and what makes you happy and what you desire from life. Because there's layers of self-discovery there. There's the initial layer of figuring out who you are, but the next layer after that is, what do you actually want from life? I think that's something that I had to take many, many years to slowly uncover. And for anyone else who relates to that lived experience of, childhood sexual trauma and even, sexual trauma that you sustain in adulthood, it's really complicated because when you experience trauma and violation intermixed with sex and the physical sensations of sex, it really does stick with you in a very profound way that you can't just sector off and forget about. Like, you can't just not have sex for the rest of your life, because let's say you do meet a partner that you trust and you feel so safe with. You're still going to have sex with that person. You're still going to want to connect with them and be vulnerable and open up. But then that's the exact moment where you have to now come face to face with this very deeply ingrained trauma, or density, as I like to call it, that you hold in yourself. And you have to go through the trouble of taking that ball of yarn and untangling it, in a sense. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I went and untangled that yarn, it wasn't an easy process where it was like the more I untangled, the more neat it got. It was almost the opposite. The more I untangled, the more knots I found inside the knots. And then I had to go untangle those knots. And then it was like a very layered process, which is what I find so fascinating about this topic of sexual shadow work, because some of the questions and themes that I had to ask myself is, what do I actually desire as Irene, as a soul, before I went through anything? And what are the things I was taught to desire through conditioning of what's normal and what you should want, and what sort of desire was rooted in the pain and aspects of moments where you felt so helpless that the only way you could cope was to either completely dissociate or to almost resonate with those feelings of shame and fear as if that was what you desired. And so that kind of goes into re-traumatizing yourself without knowing it, because you pursue similar situations or feelings because that's the only emotion you know how to associate to desire. And then you have to almost uncover layers of, when do I actually want to say no? When am I saying no when I actually want to say yes? When am I actually saying yes when I actually want to say no? And then it gets really complicated, right?
Yes. And this is why we do the work, because there are so many layers to this. And I get this a lot where people come to me and they're into something, perhaps something really kinky or dark, or, something that's really taboo. And they think, is this because of my trauma? And the answer is always maybe, but also don't pathologize yourself either. Of course, if it's bringing lots of pain or shame, let's work with that. But we don't want to say, let's heal away your kink. Let's heal away your sexual desire, because what we find, or what I found specifically when I do shadow work with people, someone might come to me with a particular kink. And I say, listen, we're going to do the work on this. We're going to pull the layers up, and there's going to be two things that are going to happen probably, right? One is going to be like, oh, you know what? I realized that I was really into this because it was very much tied to some life experience that I had once. But once it got processed, the person's like, not super interesting to me anymore. This was kind of my path a little bit. In certain ways, certain things I didn't like as much, and I got kinkier in other ways. Okay. So this is like one of the things where you might lose interest in that thing, or you might actually end up liking that thing more, or you end up really owning that thing. One of my clients right now, I'm sure he wouldn't mind that I would talk a little bit about this, but he came to me and he had sadist fantasies. And as we've been doing the work, the shadow work, we've been working together probably like 8 months now. What's unfolded is like his life path is actually to be a pro dom. And now he's like in this community, and he's and he's so alive. And the question is like, yeah, did it have something to do with your mother? Maybe, but who cares? Because you are so happy doing this. And also it serves the collective, right? It serves the collective when you can be fully shame-free in your kink. And also, in his case specifically, he's going to be a healing practitioner, right? With this kink that might have been born from trauma or whatever. But the thing is when he came to me, he was very ashamed. He felt very compulsive around it because there was so much repression around it. So once we start pulling the strings of like, where's this repression? Where's the shame? Let's do the shadow work around it. Now, what are we left with? And what are we going to do with it?
So this is something I explore a lot with my clients as well, my autistic clients. And it's interesting that you do the same thing. I always tell them, as neurodivergent folks, there's a point in where processing something becomes useless because you're almost getting too much information. And if you're not able to do something about it to get it out somehow, then you're weighing yourself down. There has to be a balance of, okay, I have to be aware as I'm exploring aspects of myself. And sometimes that might mean I don't really know why I'm doing something or why I have this desire, but I'm just gonna go into it. Be aware as you're exploring. You don't have to be completely ignorant just to explore these parts of yourself, and you don't have to know all the answers before you explore it. Observe what rings true to you, what triggers you, what makes you feel empowered, what makes you feel good, and then once you get that information, you could kind of process it afterwards, like introspect on what a certain experience made you feel. And I think that is a really great way to kind of alchemize, because then you feel like you're constantly interacting with these data points that you're getting, and you're constantly able to push it into the next time you experience something. And it feels more like you're a creator or an active member to shaping your life and experiencing your life than this person who constantly has to step back and detach from yourself to observe yourself from above and think, why am I doing that? Why do I like that?
Yeah, well, a big part of it is being able to look at these things with like a curious mind and non-judgment. And I think for a lot of neurodivergent people, it's like we've kind of always been told that we just don't fit in certain ways. You know what I mean? So that we kind of get into this fixer mentality. I know for me, I was like, okay, I just got to like fix everything that's wrong with me and then everything will be fine. And it's like, you can only process things so much. You can only keep it up here so much from this intellectualization of like your emotions and what's going on. The work that I do with people, it's like almost magic the way that it works, because aside from coaching is, I do visualizations with people. So I bring people in almost like hypnotic states so we can get into their unconscious mind and bring up symbolism and things like this. And when you make a commitment to like say, okay, I'm going to work on this, or I'm going to like do the shadow work around this, you're signaling to your unconscious mind that like, okay, like I'm ready to see what's behind door number 3, and things will start happening in your environment. So I always say like the shadow work integration happens in your life. It happens in action. It happens in your behavior, because that's the only way that you can reprogram your nervous system and the neural pathways, is to make different decisions or choose different actions when you are put in certain situations. When you were saying earlier, being able to say, do I like this or not like this? You know, if someone comes to me, and this is like a common thing too, where it's like, I don't know what I like, or I can't speak up for what I like, or I have these like people pleasing tendencies, my boundaries suck, you know, and I want to be more empowered in this area of my life. Well, great. Well, get ready to like have experiences where the universe is going to ask you to make those different choices. That's really how the work, quote unquote, settles in to who we are and how we can bring more of our true self forward. It's by taking the actions of that true self. If you think about sex from a symbolic lens, sex is integration, right? Our unconscious mind is always trying to integrate the things that we've repressed in our unconscious mind. So you will find desirable things in the taboo or places where you've had trauma or towards whatever you've repressed.
That's really interesting. What I took from that is you're almost using pleasure to not just re-traumatize yourself, but you're creating this endless cycle of putting yourself in situations that make you feel helpless in order for you to either gain power over it or find relief in it. But in a way, yes, that could feel empowering when you're in that loop, because it's almost like you're choosing to feel that way. But at the same time, it keeps you in the loop and makes you incapable of finding other aspects of pleasure and joy.
It's conscious versus unconscious, right? This is like repetition compulsion. Like something really traumatic happened to me, and it's almost like your nervous system, your unconscious mind is going to keep getting drawn back to that scenario because it's trying to find resolution, right? It's trying to find resolution or some kind of control over that situation that it knows is traumatic. So at an unconscious level, when you're unconscious about it, you might end up in like situations that you don't want to end up in, right? Where you're replaying the trauma. And that can feel very, and I had this happen. I know this very well. I almost had, I want to say like a victim complex almost, but it was like I kept going back to like predatory people because that's what my nervous system knew. There was some resolution that was trying to happen. Now, there is a place for doing this consciously. And this is why BDSM as a healing modality is a really important topic that not enough people talk about, I think, because I don't know if you've ever read like The Body Keeps Score or anything like that, but
Yes.
yes. Okay. So essentially, when we go through something that is like really traumatic, you basically need to be able to complete the cycle. Otherwise, that energy of that like trauma kind of lives in your body. So you have to complete the cycle where you get out okay at the other end to quote unquote complete the cycle, to like tell your nervous system that you're actually safe and clear away that energy.
That kind of reminds me of EMDR, because it's this concept of putting yourself in a situation that engages your body in a way where you can access certain parts of your memory, emotions that you wouldn't really have access to otherwise. In the context of sexual trauma, going into these experiences with a lot of awareness as to the purpose for this sort of container, in a sense, where I'm gonna maybe even put myself in a similar traumatizing experience, but it's not necessarily with an unsafe person. It's done in a safe way so that it's almost reprogramming your brain to associate good emotions or feelings of safety with sex rather than just kind of unconsciously putting yourself in actual dangerous situations that just re-traumatize yourself.
This is why in BDSM, there's something called aftercare. So after this really heavy scene where you're getting quote unquote re-traumatized, there's a loving exchange where you're held and cared for at the end, and it helps complete the cycle, if that makes sense. This is also what kind of bridged me into what I'm doing with the Jungian psychology coaching work. Was I saw this happen in real life in my BDSM work. where we would be doing a psychodrama, we would be doing a role play of an actual trauma that someone went through, but it was through the relationship with me that helped heal, because it was like the secure attachment with this person that was also, traumatizing me in this like fun, kinky, pleasurable way. And for some people, like doing something like that might be the only way that they're able to clear it, or the only way to clear it quickly, or completely.
What about people that have kind of came out of that chunk of shadow work and they're in this weird in-between where they might have unlocked aspects of their sexuality that comes from their authentic self, but maybe there's aspects of their trauma that still plays a part in their sex life? What does that usually look like for people?
Yeah. And that's why I say it's like if you find yourself in like a cycle of experiences that are undesirable to you sexually, that's a sign to do shadow work, to do sexual shadow work. And there's other aspects of this too. And it's also like your mindset and the story you're telling yourself about what you like. So for example, I like doming, but I also liked subbing, but I was like really weird about subbing with people because I was like, oh my gosh, this is like mirroring, my trauma or something. And I had lots of like weird shame around it. And the more that I did my own shadow work around that, it's like, yeah, okay, perhaps there's probably something here around my trauma, but also I'm like an on-stage person, I'm like a Leo moon. Perhaps my ego likes a little bit of the humiliation, it's balancing, because it's also a way to play with your shadow, play with your desires, play with your shadow in your sexuality. But that's like fine, like I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Again, because everybody has conditioning or perhaps trauma that makes them repress things.
I'd be curious to know, what's the difference between a sexual mask and a sexual persona?
A lot of people have what would be their sexual persona, how they want to appear. And everybody has this to some degree, like, oh, I want to be sexy. I want to be skilled. Sometimes you use persona and mask interchangeably, but I just want to say there's nothing necessarily wrong with having a mask or a persona where you're putting on different roles to explore your sexuality and to explore different parts of your psyche. What's your persona? What's the mask you show to the world? And people will say, I'm outgoing. I'm on stage all the time. I'm, a confident person. So what would my kink codes be? It's whatever the opposite is, right? It's like, okay, maybe a little humiliation, maybe a little bit of submission, maybe a little bit of shutting the fuck up is hot to me, right? Whatever is the opposite of whatever you're showing the world, you'll probably have fun doing in bed. But then let's go into the bedroom. You probably have a separate persona for your bedroom, right? Are you kind of like in your goddess energy? Are you kind of like confident? Are you the one that's taking charge or whatever? Then you look on the other side of that. Well, then what are you repressing? So if you're like, I want to be beautiful when I'm having sex, well, then you might be repressing ugly, which means like you might be self-conscious about that little role that you have, or your hair getting too messed up or whatever.
Is a sexual mask negative, and is a sexual persona and archetype a positive thing because it's something that you could experiment and play around with, whereas the mask feels more like it's something you don't get to choose? It's almost like a survival thing where you feel like you have to put it on in order to participate.
So I don't think it's necessarily a problem unless it's something you're doing all of the time and it's based in shame. Then it's probably going to have detrimental effects on your psyche. When you're engaging in sex, perhaps with a partner or with someone that you love, or you want to be able to connect and you feel like, okay, I have to be somebody else to be sexually attractive to this person, or I need to enact what I saw in porn in order to be good in bed. You're like not being yourself to gain approval from somebody else. That can be really detrimental for your spirit, because you're kind of telling yourself unconsciously, I'm not worthy of being seen. I'm not worthy of having a sexual experience where I'm like fully myself.
Where does neurodivergence play into this whole conversation? Because sometimes people don't even really know what archetypes they want to experiment with or what their different personas are.
Yeah, it really depends on the flavor of neurodivergence that you have. But like I said, I have found that kink and BDSM is great for neurodivergence because there's a couple of things going on. One, BDSM scenes are always negotiated. So you know what's happening, right? Like there's like clear communication. There's no reading between the lines. I'm going to play this role. You're going to play that role. We're going to do this. I'm going to tie you up. It's very clear, right? And a lot of neurodivergent people like that because it's like, okay, we know what's going on here. Also, too, even for, like I said, people that might be neurodivergent and like leaning more on the asexual side, there are a lot of sensory experiences that you can have in like a very physical BDSM container. So whether that be being tied up, bondage, being flogged or whipped, or like bringing sensation into the body is a great way to regulate the nervous system. It's a great way to be in the body. So even from like a therapeutic perspective, like BDSM can be really good just for that, right? For the somatic experience of it. But also for the role play, if you're going to take on different archetype, or you're going to take on a different role, it's a really cool way to get to know yourself better, right? Because it's like, okay, what roles feel uncomfortable to me and like why, you know what I mean? This is what they call edge play in BDSM. It's like, you kind of do it to be uncomfortable. You know what I mean? To like know what feels comfortable for you and what doesn't feel comfortable for you. Like certain roles might bring something else out of you that you didn't know that you had. Like I said, BDSM is like an embodied form of shadow work, but like you're in this process of getting to know who you are and what you like. Playing out different roles is kind of a low stakes way of doing that, right? Where you're like, okay, I can play out this role and I'm doing it for this amount of time. And then I can sit with it afterwards and be like, yeah, I did like that. Or no, I didn't really like that, you know?
So something I see repeating again and again is the themes of how important bringing consciousness and awareness to everything that has to do with yourself and your sexuality is. Because it's less about judging yourself or judging your traumas or judging where you're at in your journey or how you're making certain choices. It's more so about just making conscious choices, period. Knowing your conscious experiences and how you want to explore that and how that makes you feel. And when you even brought up BDSM and why it's so helpful and healing even for neurodivergence and how the innate themes that a scene brings to a neurodivergent's life, being able to, as you said, negotiate the scene, consent to it, you know exactly what's going on. All of that to me sounds like it's just very intentional. You know exactly what you're getting yourself into and why you're getting into it and what you're going to experience while you're experiencing it because you have awareness already. It's like a positive loop in a sense, a positive cycle of intentionally pursuing something and then being able to learn more and more about yourself through that experience after. And then it informs the next cycle that you're getting yourself into.
When you get to kind of play these opposite roles, it kind of helps balance things that you have repressed, right? So this is why a woman being a dominatrix is like such that, you know what I mean? It's like you're literally playing the opposite role in society, right? To express this part of yourself that just naturally gets repressed because of society. I know from my work as a dominatrix, completely changed like my confidence, the way that I moved through the world, the way that I thought about sex and sexual, like it changed everything. So that's the thing is when you get to try on these different personas, these different sexual personas in a very intentional way, you can choose what qualities you want to take with you into like how you're going to express yourself in your everyday life.
I love that you said that because I actually give very similar advice to my clients when they have no idea what their starting point is. That's honestly what it could be like sometimes when you're a late diagnosed neurodivergent is you're in your 30s or your late 20s or maybe even your 40s, 50s, 60s, and you still don't really know who you are. It's almost like a blank slate in a sense. And I know it could be very overwhelming to try to figure out, okay, who am I? That's a very daunting sort of task, right?
Yeah.
Something I like to suggest that actually simplifies it and kind of bridges the gap is just ask yourself, who are you right now? And do the opposite of everything. Start there. Usually you will start to realize what sort of side you resonate more with. Do you resonate with the side that you've already been doing, or do you actually kind of resonate with the other side? And oftentimes that's what self-discovery can be, whether it's your own identity or your sexual desires or your sex drive, all that kind of stuff is being able to, like you said, play with one end of the spectrum and the other and seeing where you lie in between those 2 points, you know?
I love that you're explaining it like this because yes, this is actually how shadow integration works. Like I see this a lot with when I have people come to me around boundaries. They have a shadow about being an asshole or a bitch or whatever, right? So then when we start digging in and figuring out, well, what's wrong with being a bitch? Like what's wrong with that? Like we start pulling the threads and then untying the knots. Then you'll see that people will swing in the other direction, and sometimes pretty hard, where they're like super asshole, for a little bit. Because what happens is then this like new identity gets tested in the external world, and your ego needs to see where the limits are to this other side too. So then you can come back into balance, be like, okay, I know what that side is, and you can kind of come to this middle ground where you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to be. Now I know how to have healthy boundaries. That's always the answer of like the integration of that, right?
That's so interesting because I see this in my clients sometimes as well, where they'll swing so far onto the other side.
Yeah.
But sometimes I see them get stuck there. And what you're helping me realize now is because when they swing to the other side, their ego identifies with that identity now.
So that we call this persona swapping, because I've had this happen a couple times too. And now that we're talking through this, I'm like, yeah, I think it is a neurodivergent thing, because when you're so used to masking, you're just like, okay, well, I'll just take this mask on and put on the other one. And in Jungian terms, we would call that persona swapping. But that is normal to do for a minute. But yeah, when you get stuck there, it's a phenomenon to understand that can happen when you're doing your self-development work, is to learn the other thing. You might swing in the opposite direction, but try not to get stuck there, because then you just swapped out one mask for another one.
Exactly. And so what I think happens when people do that sort of persona swapping, whether it's sexual or not, the core to that sort of experience is not having a good connection to your actual center, in a sense. I think that's where the neurodivergence can come into play, where you constantly feel so dysregulated. And something that I spend a lot of time with my clients deconstructing is knowing what type of dysregulation you're experiencing, because we don't just have dysregulation or anxiety. It's important to know, when am I just objectively overstimulated versus when am I emotionally dysregulated? The reason why I do that is because the answer to those anecdotes is to, let's say if you're emotionally dysregulated, is to feel your emotions and release it. The answer is not to think through it and intellectualize it, right? And likewise, if you're going through a mental overload, the answer isn't to move through the emotions, right? It's more so about, how do I get the support I need from people or resources to work through this problem and problem solve, and almost detach emotion from that. And so all of this to say, I feel like people who persona swap are the types of people that are so used to making decisions and taking on these personas regardless of how it makes them feel. And I think that's the important equalizing part, is when you're swinging onto the other side, you have to be fully present and ask yourself, how does this make me feel? Do I have to adjust anything? Do I like anything? How do I integrate any changes to make things feel even better? And usually that sort of integration part is what allows people to kind of swing back and forth and equalize in a more
Yeah, well, here's the thing is, if you don't come back to the middle and you just persona swap, you're going to have the same problem. You can see this in like people in relationships, right? I've been dating this kind of person and it hasn't been working out. So now I'm just going to date the opposite kind of person. It's like you're still working, you know what I mean? You're still working on these like extremes. You're not really integrating what's going on here. And it's like, you're still going to attract the same problem or the same undesired results when you just persona swap, because you're not addressing the core of what's going on. And this is where ego resistance comes into play in the conversation, because when we start doing the work, going to do the shadow work, our ego has very interesting and tricky ways to get us back to our old identity. And this is like one of the main things that pops up is over intellectualization. That is my number one ego resistance. So I know when I start overthinking, or I'm reading the 10th book of the week or something, it's like you're not trusting your intuition, you're overthinking, you're doing this thing. And it's like your ego knows, if I just get her on this topic and she just starts, then she'll not do what she's supposed to do. Also, it comes up in like your external reality too, which I find so freaking interesting. I don't know if you've like noticed this with your clients, but when we're doing like the deep inner work, random shit will happen. Flat tires or a sprained ankle, or there's like all of these kind of weird external things that start happening in the environment because in a way, your reality is kind of glitching out. You know, if you want to say you're quantum jumping, you're moving into a different reality because you are moving into a different identity. There'll be these resistance type of things that pop up. But again, it's about consciousness, because if you know, like, okay, I'm making changes to my identity, you kind of expect, you're kind of like on the lookout for this resistance, you know what I mean? To know that it's working actually. So I always tell people, lean into resistance, you know. I had it happen, like a client was telling me the other day, he's like, I don't know what it is. Like the past couple of times, like right before I'm supposed to get on a call with you, I get really tired. Like I need to fall asleep or I get distracted and I'm late. Like that can sometimes happen, especially when we're getting into something really deep. There are these very unconscious things that will pop up. It's like the person that's afraid of being seen gets a public speaking gig and then gets laryngitis that morning. You know, like these things really do happen. And that is what you would call ego resistance.
This conversation is helping me realize all the different pendulum swings that is in this shadow work journey. When you're on that journey of swinging to the other side and trying to figure out who you are in the middle of these 2 points, I'm sure you see this as well, but I see clients who almost lose themselves in too much awareness. There's too much information, and it's almost spinning them out to a certain point because they're unable to ultimately surrender, where they don't even really know how to make their next move type of a thing. It's almost OCD like traits start to come out, very compulsive, overthinking, and they can't make the next move until they solidified all the things that have to happen prior to making the next move, you know? Do you see that happen as well?
Yeah, that's the ego trying to control. You always want to find out what the ego's fear is and why it's either ignoring everything, right? And just like letting things happen, or if they're trying to over control. Well, what happens if you don't put in all this mental energy? What happens if you don't control this? You're always going to get an answer of like, well, blah, blah, blah. And then you ask again and you ask again and you ask again. And then you've always find out that like fear of death, fear of dying alone, fear of losing everything, right? Because that's all the ego cares about. It cares about surviving. It cares about its resources. So like it's always the ego trying to control for what it believes is for survival. But I mean, in general, and this is like, I'm also saying this for me as someone that had intellectualization as their number one ego defense, go touch grass. Like just go outside, like go be in nature. Like that's truly. And also I think that a lot of people overlook the body, but it's like your body has all the information that you need to live a happy, safe, healthy life. It doesn't happen up here. You're using your brain for the wrong thing because our intuition lives in our body. Our emotion lives in our body. And this is, I think, the toughest work for people that are neurodivergent. It's being in the body. It's still the work that I'm doing on myself. Like this is actively what I'm personally working on is I'm still working on the body piece. It's been years too. And I'm getting better and better and better. But that's the real work, I think, for neurodivergent people. It's like that relationship and that communication channel that you have with your body.
Exactly. That's something I have been doing on my own and with my clients as well within the past few years, is realizing that, like you said, go touch grass. To me, I see it as like, it's not that serious at the end of the day. At the end of the day, what actually matters is how you feel and what your body is going through. This is why it's so important to find resources that gives you advice that is geared towards neurodivergent neurology and needs, because this advice would not work for everyone. Telling people to not take it that seriously and to just like not think is not really something that would apply to, let's say, non-autistic people or neurotypical people, because I oftentimes find that neurodivergent folks are way too self-aware to a point where it cripples them in a sense. And the key is to almost bring it all back down to what matters, which is the body.
You want to know what it took me to get out of burnout? This last burnout I had, it took 2 years. It took filing for bankruptcy. It took like 1 year of just traveling. I had to literally just give up my old life and say, I'm not going to work. And that's the true sacrifice, is that you have to say, you know what I've been doing is not working. I'm stressed out. I feel terrible. I feel no joy. I'm tired. I'm miserable. Your ego always wants you to contract, wants you to stay where you are. It doesn't want you to make any moves that it doesn't know. Like, it's like, don't do that, right? And I knew years ago that I wanted to build the life that I have now. And I was too scared. But I think for a lot of neurodivergent, or especially people that had early life trauma, if we've been through the therapy system for a long time, it can feel like I just keep going and I keep getting diagnoses and we keep just like rehashing everything that's wrong with me. And it like almost reinforces the labels. Don't take these labels and attach to them, because that's actually not who you are.
Because sometimes intuition can make you want to do something that is so scary for you. So to kind of add on to what you just shared, a good way to kind of tune into that is that ego is limiting. So like you said, it kind of compresses you back into your shell, but you still feel safe because you know how things are going to play out. You might not feel good about how it's playing out, or you might be disappointed, but you feel safe because you know what to expect. Whereas intuition feels expansive and freeing, regardless of the fears. Your intuition could still make you feel scared. And so people have a hard time being like, oh, is my body telling me yes, or is it telling me to stay away? You may find yourself not knowing how things are going to turn out, or how you're going to feel, or where you're going to end up. But at the end of the day, it's like this weird feeling of just expansiveness, because that feels better than suppressing yourself and condensing yourself back into that shell, you know?
Also, intuition happens in the body, which is also why you want to really work on the connection to your body. Like, your ego is always yapping away in your mind, but your body knows what's up. When we really trust our intuition, it means that we actually get out of our head. It means that we're not really overanalyzing everything that we're doing. We're just doing things and we're trusting it.
That's so true. In these very, very insignificant, quiet, simple moments, I was able to experience the most powerful energetic shifts. There'd be so many moments where I would be on a walk in a really beautiful trail, and then I would just realize that I felt so good. And I would start crying because of that, because I'm like, I feel good. And I hadn't felt like this in a long time. And it would bring back memories of the last time I felt that, when I was a little girl. And then it would be like one of those moments of connection where I felt like I finally closed a loop, and I just felt so profoundly grateful. And I feel like that sort of feeling, I could never bottle up and explain it to another person. And I don't have to, because that's what makes the human experience human, is that we just get to experience that. Really quick insert here. The audio for Jaclyn is going to be a little bit reverby for the rest of this video. I'm not sure what happened, so bear with me. I hope it doesn't bother you guys too much and take away from the topic that we're talking about.
I had so much soul loss from my childhood that it was one of these realizations. I was like, I don't even know. Like, I literally can't even come up with like a simple thing like, what's my favorite texture? What's my favorite smell? I feel like that was when I realized, no, I need to do this work. I'm not connected to something vital. During that time, I was like holding on to my soul by a thread. I was drinking all the time too. I was smoking cigarettes. I lived by the beach and like never went. Now, it's just wild, the consciousness level that I have now and the way that I experience the world now. And it's an experience. It's a feeling that you can't really describe to people, because it really is just like a different level of consciousness and how you're interacting with the world. And what I've noticed is the more that I'm on this journey and the more that I'm on this awakening or individuation journey, is that with each new layer, the connection to the earth is so spiritually important, right? And this kind of goes back to being in the body. It's the same kind of thing. I can really pick up all of the pleasure and the sensations around me. And that's why doing this work is just so powerful. You don't even know what you're missing until you do the work.
At the end of the day, go touch grass. At the end of the day, it's actually really stupidly simple. It starts with your body, whether that's feeling the emotions that are already there, or just feeling of safety or comfort, and then having that unlock other layers that you were unable to access before. And I think the biggest misconception people have, or neurodivergent folks have, is thinking that our mind is the only tool to unlock what our emotions are or any sort of spiritual aspect of our life is. It's actually, if anything, it keeps you from unlocking those parts of yourself. The mind, I feel like, is not a good vessel to unlock those parts of yourself because the mind doesn't want to feel the things that is to be unlocked. It wants to keep it away. Whereas the body, I think, is the key container to unlocking those things. The body is not concerned with whether or not a feeling is valid or emotion feels good or bad. The body's just concerned with, this is what's happening to me right now, and how do I let it equalize? Your body is such a beautiful tool that you don't even have to tell it what to do. It just knows. It knows it without being told. It knows what it means to feel it, to let go of it, to move through it, and how to move on from it. And you kind of have to let your body just go through that process as it needs to and trust it, almost like surrender to your body in a sense, and let it move through whatever emotions.
There's something archetypally that can happen in the psyche, and where you might say it's like self-sabotage, but where there's almost this dark passenger that showed up to protect your innocence, right? But then kind of doesn't want to give the baby back in certain ways. So there's almost this darker kind of protector, persecutor energy that's living in someone's psyche. That this is where you start to get into this kind of anti-life energy when people get to like a deep depression, or they really feel like, I can't get outside, I can't go for a walk, I can't stop drinking, or I can't stop this, whatever. And this is where I say to people that if it is really hard for you to do these things, like it was for me, just start small, kind of like you said, start really small, and eventually you'll like it. It might be really hard and you might hate it for a couple of months, but I swear, like if you just keep doing it, and it doesn't even have to be anything crazy. Go take a walk outside, dance for 5 minutes in the morning, move around.
For me, most of the unlocking happened when I finally felt actually safe and fully held and fully accepted. Those are things that I've uncovered with just stretching my body out in a certain way. So
yeah.
I don't know if you've tried this position, but I've laid with a block on my back, and then it kind of just pushes your chest forward. And when you fully relax into it, I remember when I first tried that out, I just started crying so bad because I realized how many years of my life, like the past 15 years, I was just like curled up in a fetal position in a sense. So just feeling that physical release, it was such a profound experience.
We store a lot of trauma right here in the shoulders, in the chest, and in the hips. And that's a big one, heart opening and hip opening. Another thing to do is like anything that gets your muscles shaking. This is, again, also nervous system stuff, because when I talked about how trauma needs to complete the cycle, right, in the body, if you look at what happens in the natural world, an antelope is getting chased by a lion or whatever. Once the threat's gone, you'll see that the animal will shake. It'll shake its body because you're literally shaking out that energy. If you've had a lot of trauma or a lot of repression, getting your body to shake or tremor is really good at just like discharging some of that trauma energy. For me, I had to spend basically, it was a while, like I said, I'm still doing it. There was a period of time there that I was doing my red light therapy. I was doing cryotherapy. I was doing like Pilates and stuff, because again, it's like small motions and tremors and things. And I remember doing it and being like, I don't think this is working, because that's the thing. The relationship with your body is never going to be a quick thing. You're not going to go for a walk and then be like, I'm healed. And then it was like, maybe after a year or so of like kind of consistently letting my body move and doing things that were nourishing for my body, and generally having some kind of movement practice multiple days a week. It was just like one day that I just realized, wait a second, something's different. And it wasn't this black and white, something's changed so rapidly. It's really slow that suddenly you're like, wow, I have more capacity to be in uncomfortable situations. I suddenly have more energy, or this is a situation I wouldn't have been comfortable in before, but yet I'm fine. Interesting,
That's so true. And I'm so glad you said that, because even though I said I was crying on that walk, that's not something that just happened. That was 5 years of doing practices like that, 3 years of maybe not feeling anything when I did that. And then maybe on year 4 or 5, I started to incrementally have those moments. And like you said, it just comes out of nowhere, because it's not something you force. It's just a practice that you do diligently and consistently. And then one day your body will click into place and realize, I feel good. I see those feelings as whispers that are always there, but maybe your ears didn't pick up on it at first. And you have to be willing to keep doing it even when you don't pick up on those voices and those feelings until one day you can. And then when you finally hear it, those are those very profound experiences, you know?
Totally. And for me personally, it's just wild, the consciousness level that I have now and the way that I experience the world now. And it's an experience. It's a feeling that you can't really describe to people because it really is just like a different level of consciousness and how you're interacting with the world. And what I've noticed is the more that I'm on this journey and the more that I'm on this awakening or individuation journey is that the connection to the earth is so spiritually important, right? And this kind of goes back to being in the body. I would probably take a walk and not even like notice the flowers before. And now it's like I walk around and I'm like, oh, holy shit, like we live in this like beautiful world. I can really pick up all of the pleasure and the sensations around me. And that's why doing this work is just so powerful. You don't even know what you're missing. Until you do the work. Another really interesting after effect of this, over the course of time, I've slowly developed a lot of clairsentience in my body. Like from not being able to feel my body before, where I'll actually like feel sensations like in my body when like my intuition or my higher self is like, pay attention to that. So for example, like it happens a lot in my client calls too. Like someone will say just like a random thing and my whole body will just start vibrating. These little sensations will go everywhere where it's like, oh, okay, my body's telling me that this is like an important thing that I need to like take note of for like whatever's going on in their life, that I need to like hang on to this story, you know, for something's gonna come up later again or something. But it's like I'll get this like these sensations in my body, or I'll get like tingles in my nose when I'm like when my heart is connecting to me, right? When I'm in like beauty or things like this. So it's like suddenly like weird, like I'm having like weird body sensations that are like specifically coming from my soul. So like that's a pretty cool after effect of doing the somatic work, that I'm like, oh, like my body's like actually really smart. Like no wonder my ego was repressing this so hard, because like I'll never have to listen to it again. Like my body is like this cool instrument. And you don't know what your body superpowers are until you like connect with them, you know?
That's so crazy. I get that too. I don't like to talk too much about spirituality because people have such a polarizing relationship with it. But I do the same during my client sessions. There's certain points in the session when they're sharing something where I'll get an intuitive hit. And like you said, it's a sensation either in your stomach or like a buzzing, or sometimes I get really hot and my cheeks will turn pink, or sometimes I'll even start shaking. It's also a skill set to know how to tune into it. At first, it could just be a sensation and you feel like, oh my God, what's happening? But when you actually start trusting it, you can uncover actual information. And so sometimes when I uncover it, I'll do like a spiral drawing on my notes, and I'll just do it as like a side thing. I'll do a spiral drawing and then I'll write the intuitive message that I have. I don't tell them. It's just for myself as like a guide for them. It's almost like a bookmark. Like we are going to get back to this for some reason, somehow. I don't know when, but we're going to have to circle back to this. And sometimes it'll be months later. Well, they'll say something or they'll be at a certain point in the journey where I'm like, that's it. They're here. This is something I wrote down a few months ago. They're finally at this point. And I love having those moments of like, okay, we're unlocking those key points for this person, you know?
Totally. And I know what you mean. Oh man, if we had more time, I would love to talk about how to understand spirituality from like a neurodivergent brain, because I also had a huge problem with this. And this is also why I probably repress a lot of like my psychic abilities, because I was like, all those people are full of shit and like God isn't real. And like I had like so many religious trauma, probably, you know what I mean? Where I really looked at spirituality as this like dogmatic thing. But I'll just say this. Take away all of like religion, take away all of these ways that human beings have tried to manipulate each other through spiritual concepts, and think about spirituality as like your connection with yourself and how that connects to everybody else and like the earth. That's what spirituality is at like a really very basic level, period. That's like what it is. And yeah, that's it. So it's like, we don't have to, you know, religify it in any other way.
I'm not going to get into it, but like you said, spirituality, an actual spiritual practice and connection should deepen your understanding and connection to yourself and others, not sever it or, It should not be blocking you off from people or your understanding of people. And as soon as it starts getting to that route, it's not really a good sign of actually tuning into your spiritual aspects, I feel like.
And this is the thing too. They say like the journey to yourself is a spiral maze, which I love that you say you do the little spirals, but that's what's happening is you're always going to come up against, the new levels, new devils, but it's like, you're going to come across the same thing sometimes multiple ways. Now I'm my true self. And then your ego comes in and starts other things and starts getting tricky and starts looking at the world and changing things. And then you're like, wait a second. Oh shit. I just built another mask that I now need to like unwind. So it's like this fun experience. And this is also too why I say it's like you said, it's not that serious. I think because I came from a lot of therapy, there's like, there's always something wrong with you. And there's always all these labels and you need medication. And everything's very serious like that. I'm like, it's not that serious. In fact, like shadow work can be light and fun. And also doing sexual shadow work can be light and fun. We don't need to be sitting here taking it too seriously. Yes, of course, there's time and space for like feeling through the darkness and crying and emotions and all that. But like, sometimes it can just be light and fun.
Part of doing sexual shadow work is just being able to come out of a sexual experience and think, I just enjoyed that. And it was that simple. There should be nuance to that journey of shadow work where it's not constantly you holding your density and trying to chip away at it. And this is a theme you explored multiple times now, is just you should have options. You should have nuance. You should have multiple ways that you're experiencing and processing something, and it shouldn't always be this like intense, painful, intellectual experience. It could be just a dumb, simple sort of experience and nothing else to it. And sometimes it is going to be very profound and deep and spiritual, but as long as you just know the purpose for each one of those experiences and you can value them all the same.
Yeah, 100%.
If you could kind of just give your top 5 advice for people who's just starting out on this journey of trying to reclaim their sexual sovereignty or work through their sexual shadow work, what would those 5 advice be?
Ooh, okay. Let me think about that. Well, one is if you're doing sexual shadow work, if you're like on this part of your journey where you're like, okay, I really want to have more sovereignty in this area of my life. I want to have more pleasure or awareness or fun in this area of my life. First thing want to do is take inventory. What did you learn about sex? What was your first experience with it? Was there anything that ever happened to you when you were younger that you felt shame around? Well, what does your sex life look like now? Like I have a checklist in this workbook where you can kind of look through and say, okay, like, do I experience any of these things? What messages did you get from your family, from your friends, from your school, from your church? What messages did you get around sex? Also collective influences. You can think about what is the media saying and really getting deep into that. Really, really going deep and considering. So if you want to get intellectual, go hard in this area of like what the conditioning is so that you know. I know we talked about the body, but whenever you're doing any kind of shadow work, whenever you're doing any kind of self-development work, it can be dysregulating for the nervous system. It can be uncomfortable. So like have something that is good for your nervous system. So yeah, a daily dance, a shake, a cryotherapy appointment, cold plunge, learn about your body, learn about your nervous system and understand how it works. Another thing that you can do is look at projections that you have. Where are you judging other people in their sexuality? What things do you find gross, wrong, morally corrupt, right? Like really figure out where your triggers are in your sexuality or your sexual expression. And you can do shadow work around that. And this is where you get a coach for this because, our ego, we get too close to some of these answers. We don't really want to go there. Also, have more lightness and fun. If I was going to say to some advice, just lightness and fun and curiosity and non-judgment, go into the work with that kind of vibe. That's the most important, because if you're not going in with that kind of vibe, you're actually not going to get the information that you want. You're still going to be blocked from getting to the truth when you're going at it way too serious.
Taking inventory, really tapping into body movement, regulating your body and releasing whatever needs to be released, introspecting on your judgments. So being curious about your triggers, and then have more play, more curiosity. What are ways that people can start to be more sexually playful, sexually curious, that they could start experimenting with now?
It's really a mindset shift of taking this kind of playful attitude. I know I talked about BDSM and kink as an expression, but also just like getting curious about your own body and like what feels good and playing with yourself, self pleasure, I think is like a really fun way to delve into this part, especially if you do have trauma. You want to know what you truly like first before you're out there with partners sometimes, like knowing what you like truly and knowing what brings you pleasure truly is important. I just want to say this. It's sometimes hard to get to this play part if you still have a lot of shame. There's also an aspect in there is that when we're doing the inventory and we're doing the shadow work, is the ability to honor our emotions. This was one of my big things is like, oh, feeling your emotions is like feeling it, like the sensation in your body. It's not thinking about your emotions. It's not thinking about, okay, I'm angry. It's about like truly letting that energy express itself through your body. When I say like being playful, it's like take a playful attitude. And again, that comes from you have to do the work around your shame first. And I want to say this too, because this is an important distinction, I guess. I definitely have people that come to me that are feeling shame around a specific kink or desire that they have that they feel like they can't express with another person. They're okay with expressing it with themselves. They can watch porn, they can visualize, but it's so taboo or shameful to them that they feel like they have to hide it from everybody. In those cases, also working with a practitioner, like a sex worker or professional dominatrix or someone that does professional work in the sexual realm that aligns with you could be a good option too. Because sometimes just being seen in your desires can be very healing. And sometimes it just wants to be expressed with somebody else. And that can be really, really confidence boosting. It melts away shame. It really can help integrate a lot.
Make sure that you tackle the shame that you have with yourself. And then once you feel good with that, make sure you're tackling the shame with safe people so that it feels like it's a fully expressive part of your life and your identity. And it's not something you have to either hide in certain situations or not, because you kind of have freedom of choice to take ownership of it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's like part of literally like that's part of what I do as a coach in my one-on-one work is people bring me this stuff and I'm like, okay, cool, sounds hot, like there's like nothing you can tell me that I'm gonna freak out about. Put yourself around people that aren't gonna judge you. Go find a local, they're called munches, which are like local BDSM meetups, but they're like, in your vanilla, if you're just going to a coffee shop or something that's other people in the scene. It's like put yourself around other people that are into kink or taboo stuff. And a lot of times healing does come in our connection to other people. So like that's another big thing that I would say is find other people that you feel like you can be yourself around.
There's only so much you could do on your journey by yourself. There's a certain point where you're going to have to find community, people, and connection to continue that journey, because we're humans. We're not meant to just be hermits, although there are moments where I think hermiting is necessary. But at the end of the day, life is about being able to create memories.
It's okay to like be a little broken, to have some trauma. You know what I mean? It's not the end of the world. I just want to say that because I feel like for me and a lot of people that I work with, there's always this feeling like there's something that needs to be fixed. There's something that needs to be healed because there's something like wrong with us. This is why I also don't even sometimes like using the word healing, because it might indicate that there's a wound or something that like needs to be fixed. What if your trauma was like the key to your purpose and your gifts? And what if it was actually a positive thing for your life? And once you actually alchemize all this stuff, you realize, oh, all of my trauma is the blueprint actually to my purpose and how I can serve others in the world. So that's where I'll end with that, because I'm like, that's a big piece, I think, for people to remember.
If you guys enjoyed what we talked about today around sexual shadow work and reclaiming your sexual sovereignty, and you enjoyed the tidbits of spirituality as well, and you enjoy having Jaclyn on my channel, please let us know in the comment section down below. Is there any sort of things that you want to offer to people that you have on your end?
Yeah, I'm doing a program. I'm launching a program end of April. It'll be April 27th. And that's going to be a 7-week experience where we're going to be doing shadow work with every layer, every chakra system, right? So going through, sex for survival, sex for pleasure, sex for divination, how your sexuality expresses itself spiritually, if you're interested in that. And the vibe is going to be educational. It's going to be fun. It's going to be experiential. It's called Reborn. It's just all about reclaiming your erotic sovereignty and being able to have like more confidence, play, and pleasure in your sexuality. So
beautiful. If you guys are interested in that, I will leave links to her workbook, to all of her socials, as well the program that she mentioned, if that's something you guys think you could benefit from. If you have certain things that you have to work through sexually that you might just need more guidance on, I think Jaclyn is a really beautiful resource for that journey. And the thing is, we don't have to do things by ourselves all the time. Sometimes it's just about finding the right resource and the right person to guide you. Otherwise, I mean, if you kind of just go for any sort of doctor or therapist or person, just because they have a certain title doesn't mean anything. If anything, they could guide you further away from your truth and your authenticity. So if you guys felt throughout the call, when you would hear the things Jaclyn was saying, this sort of resonant feeling of just your stomach feeling like, oh, yeah, that's so true, or you felt chills, that could be a good indication that you resonate with her. So again, I'll leave all of the links in the description box below, and utilize this resource, you guys. Thank you, Jaclyn, for being on my video today. It was so amazing having you on and exploring this conversation together. It was just so fulfilling. I got chills at multiple points, and now, I don't know if you could see, but I've been like really hot.
I've been getting it too. Yeah.
It's just crazy.
So it's like the energy is definitely flowing. No, thank you so much for having me on. I had a great time, and I love when Neurodivergence interview me because, very detailed. Another fellow neurodivergent person. Like, I appreciate it. I appreciate the detailed questions. So Thank you.
Make sure you guys take some time to drink some water, eat some food, and take yourself on a lovely walk. I'll see you next time. Bye.